course, is Elmer Cox. Elmer Cox has a lot of interesting stories to tell about Greeneville, Greene County, and the struggle to share this beautiful place with other people, travelers, people who were on the road going from one place to another and looking for shelter, sometimes looking for lodging, and always looking for a better route to get to where they were going. But people back in those days didn't always have just destination on their minds. They kind of smelled the roses as they went along. And I can tell you right now, Greeneville and Greene County is certainly a rose to be smelled while you're on the trip. This gentleman, Mr. Elmer Cox, is going to share with us now, how did all this come about? How did people discover Greeneville? How did they find Greene County? Elmer?
I'm T. Elmer Cox, 83 years old, engineer by occupation, but I've spent all my life really in industrial development of Greene County. I'm a native of the county, and people came here in the state of Franklin times with a land grant, and none of us had sense enough to leave, and so we're still here. Helen, I guess to discuss some of the things that I have seen, engaged in, we might begin with some tourist development that in the beginning, in the formation of our first Chamber of Commerce. We lost the charter, but about 1923, Mr. John D. McDonald came in here from Spruce Pine as an agent for the Standard Oil Company, and he was interested in promoting oil products and quite a few cars in the region, and that was being promoted as a way of traveling instead of horseback. So we had no idea at that time. I was in high school when it was formed, and all the older people, like you do today, to get the parents all engaged in things, use the younger people to get out and do a little promoting. All we were doing is doing what we were told by some elder, but good sales pitch to get Mama and Dad interested in the counties, get out of something just beside their own farm, what they were doing. So I suppose other people had talked about tourism and developing it, and even at that time, Detroit was a big industrial region, and were making money, and numbers of them were going to the winter Florida for winter purposes. And since cars were coming in and some roads had been improved that you could drive long distances, they were getting away from the trains and driving automobiles. So the plan was to bring the winter vacationers who were coming out of Detroit and the other industrial centers, bring them down through here as they went on their way to Florida, and hope to encourage them to come back through next spring. At that time, no blacktop roads. All of it was gravel. In fact, they hadn't been built very long. So the road we picked up was one now known as Old 70, but we gave it a name from John Fox Jr., who wrote the Little Shepherd of Kingdom Come and so on, and had the Lonesome Pine Trail in it. So we decided to name our route the Lonesome Pine Trail. It came down through Kentucky, believe it or not, through those mountains east of Harlan County, through Harlan town itself, and on over, well, you know the route, still the same route on Jonesville, Virginia, Rogersville, from here, and over into Asheville. We attempted to enter the Asheville Chamber. They had one too. They helped us some, but they already had some tourism of their own that they carried over from Vanderbilt days. But Harlan, Kentucky was especially interested in Rogersville. And while we never did develop much tourism, we sure developed a lot of riding back and forth between Greenville, going over to Harlan and dining there in the Harlan Hotel and talking about the prosperous times we were going to have with the money that was going to roll in from tourism. Of course, to look at the route now, if we had ever gotten a tourist on it, he had probably never gotten out of Kentucky in one winter, let alone even gotten this far. But that went on, believe it or not, for almost 5 years, 1927 or 28, and it would spurt up for a few weeks, and we'd have a meeting here, and the Harlan people and Rogersville developers would come over here, and we'd get a few from Asheville, and we were passing it around. It was good for the eateries in those towns where we were having meetings. So to that extent, it did stimulate business.
Thank you, Elmer Cox. I could listen to him a lot longer than the time we had for today. You know, there are many people around Greenville and Greene County who have contributed to the history, the development, and certainly to our memories and to what's happened here. And we're fortunate enough to have these people around so that we can have them share their accountings and their memories with us. Our next person we're going to hear from is Mr. Harry Roberts. He's a local historian, a history teacher, and part of what he says actually comes from the history books and books such as this. Others, of course, the remarks that he'll be making will be coming from his family stories and stories he's heard and passed down, and some of those things he will be sharing with us right now. But one of the most interesting, I think, of course, is if you are interested in romance and dashing generals running around the countryside and raiding and that kind of thing, he is pretty much an expert on General John Morgan. General Morgan will be mentioned in his story, and we're going to hear from him now. And at one point in his story, some of the things he's talking about, they were actually substantiated by his family. So this is something that I think is going to be very interesting right now to you, as it is to me. Let's listen to him now. Harry Roberts.
Well, the account of General John Hunt Morgan is certainly one of the most dramatic and probably the most romantic episode in the Civil War. If what people have told, and many people believe, was actually true, there's been nothing like it in the history of the United States. He was born in Huntsville, Alabama, was reared in Lexington, Kentucky, and turned out to be a Kentucky horseback riding young dandy. When the war came, he organized a company of cavalry, using, of course, fine Kentucky horses, and they did a great service for the Confederate Army. He and General Forrest, Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, were the two outstanding cavalrymen in the Confederate Army. His army came into Greenville on the afternoon of September the 3rd, and they were supposed to, they had come down the day before, his main army had, and according to some reports, they had supposed to have stopped in Greenville until Morgan came down to take control, but for some reason they went on down into the Blue Springs area. Well, Morgan then came down in the afternoon of September the 3rd. He was a friend of the Williams family in the Williams mansion there. Mrs. Williams it was a Confederate sympathizer, so it is thought, and a friend of Morgan, so that's where he made his headquarters. Now, the great mystery, one of the great mysteries about the war and about General Morgan has been how did the Union Army under General Gillem in Bull's Gap how did they know that General Morgan was in Greenville? Well, to make a long story short, they didn't know it. But the theories and the romantic tales that have developed have been based around the supposed ride to Bull's Gap by Lucy Rumbo Williams, who was the wife of one of the Williams men, Joseph Williams, who had joined the Union Army, not the Confederate. But she was living there in the Williams home with Mrs. Williams, even though Joseph was in the Union Army. Well, Morgan came into Greenville that afternoon, and no sooner was he there and settled in until a terrible rainstorm arose. And this is one thing that has not been exaggerated, I'm sure, and one thing that all reports agree on, and that is that it was a terrible rainstorm, thunder and lightning, that evening and that night. Now, since Morgan and his officers, his men, were going to be at the Williams homestead for overnight, of course they wanted a big, fine big supper and breakfast for them. So Lucy Rumbo Williams supposedly got on her fine black horse and left the place. So the rumor developed and has persisted that she rode the horse through the terrible storm and lightning all the way to Bull's Gap to tell General Gillem that Morgan was in Greenville at the Williams home. But this, I feel sure, is definitely a mistake. You see, the Williams family owned a farm, a large farm out in the old Asheville Highway where the tobacco experiment station is, the old Williams homes out there. I think the Williams heirs still own that farm out there. Anyway, they owned a big farm out there, and Lucy, I think, rode her horse out to the farm to get produce and meat and stuff for the feed the officers, Morgan and his men. Well, after she arrived there, the storm was so bad that they convinced her that she should spend the night and not try to come back in Greenville that night, which she did. Now, one source of my information for this is Mrs. Piper. Her family was living, her grandparents were living there on the Williams farm at the time of the Civil War. And she told me that her grandparents had handed down the story that Lucy definitely came there to get produce and food, and that they convinced her that she must spend the night, and she did. So that accounts for the fact that she rode back into Greenville the next morning at about the same time that the Union soldiers came up and captured Morgan. The Union cavalry came in to Greenville just about daylight, and some Union man, and I don't know his name, I don't know whether his name's known or not, he found out that they were coming some way, and he came out and warned them. He said, you better get out of town because Morgan himself is here in the Williams house. Now, Morgan was a name to be feared at that time. He was a legendary figure. And so, but instead of their saying, well, we'll get back because we're afraid of Morgan, they said, we'll just go in and see Morgan himself. So they came on in town then, for the first time realizing that he was in town. And so, since they knew where he was, they surrounded the Williams home and captured him. And as he was trying to escape into the garden, he supposedly went down and hid under the Episcopal Church, which was in the same block there as the front gardens of the Williams home. And then some of his men decided that that was unsafe. They wouldn't have a chance to defend themselves, so they came out of there and then were running through the grapevines and the bushes and the shrubbery when a private camel Now, I forget his, Arthur Camel in the Union Army spotted him and supposedly shot him dead right on the spot.
Well, thank you very much, Harry. We want to thank all the gentlemen who appeared here today talking and sharing their memories of Greenville and Greene County with you and, of course, with me. I certainly enjoyed it. My name is Andy Smalls, and it's been my pleasure and privilege today to have had a part in this. We heard from Oscar Jenkins Sr. first, and then, of course, Ralph Finney, Elmer Cox, and you just heard from Harry Robbins. That about closes the book on what we're doing here today in Greenville and Greene County, but it doesn't close the book on Greenville and Greene County. It's here, beautiful and vibrant, just waiting for your visit. Thank you.